Tonight on Global National, dirty business, literally. The contaminated dirt that residents say is polluting their rivers and streams.
We have laws, we have regulations. They're not being respected and they're not being enforced.
How a Quebec Indigenous community has become a dumping ground for organized crime. A changing of the guard.
When a system is in crisis, it needs stable leadership, not chaos.
The Liberal Party challenges New Brunswick's controversial leader. Plus, a steep drop in international student enrollments, what it'll mean for the overstretched housing market. And pride for Paralympians in Paris.
Canada has been doing fantastic.
The culmination of a tremendous run for Canada's athletes.
Global National, reporting tonight. Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in Kanesatake, Mohawk territory in Quebec, not far from Montreal, and a story of a community fighting illegal polluters to protect their waterways. They're saying the Quebec government hasn't done enough to stop illegal dumping of construction waste in their territory. To put pressure, they're training volunteers on how to stop and inspect dump trucks. Illegal dumping isn't just a problem there, and as Mike Armstrong reports, there are often ties to organized criminals.
This is an effort born of frustration. Locals upset, they say, governments are letting the land and waterways be polluted. Training citizens to stop trucks isn't about civil disobedience, they say, but civil obedience.
We have laws, we have regulations. They're not being respected and they're not being enforced.
Now, illegal dumping has been an issue in Kanesatake for years. About a dozen illegal sites, according to reports, operate on the Mohawk territory with impunity. Trucks carrying soil and material from development projects in Montreal make their way to Kanesatake through Oka. Over the summer, according to residents, as many as 200 to 300 a day.
It was a train, one behind the other. You couldn't drive for a kilometer without having 10, 12, 30. It was just unbelievable.
Now, the reason trucks would dump in the Mohawk territory instead of a licensed facility is money. Instead of a company paying as much as $3,000 to dump contaminated soil, for example, it can be unloaded for as little as $300. It's a practice that saved companies outside the territory millions, and one police haven't stepped in to stop, which is what this group says it may now start doing, pulling over trucks traveling through Oka to see what they're carrying.
You are angry.
The training includes some role-playing in case they come across angry drivers or worse. Some of the illegal dumps have links to organized crime that don't want to see the revenue stream dry up.
There's a risk. We know who we're dealing with. Some elements might show up.
What prevents police and inspectors from acting in Kanesatake is some of those people. The local Indigenous police force was disbanded in 2004 when it tried to crack down on crime on the territory. The Grand Chief's home was burned down by an angry mob. Kanesatake was also the site of the 1990 Oka crisis, a 78-day land dispute that escalated to the point the military was called in. Today, provincial police basically only go in when there's something very serious, fearing an escalation.
Actually, they've got the order not to do some of their interventions. So this is scary.
Now, organizers say they have support from citizens in Kanesatake, but that they can't speak out for fear of reprisals. Now, there have been some trucks stopped in recent days by inspectors. They've taken soil samples, but organizers say they will start stopping trucks themselves if government officials don't meet with them soon. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Oka, Quebec.
A group representing nearly 100 of Canada's universities is warning of declining enrollment and revenue as Ottawa's crackdown on foreign students takes hold. As Mackenzie Gray reports, universities fear the impacts are much worse than they had initially feared.
Lobby groups for post-secondary institutions say universities had a 45% drop in international student enrollment this year. And at colleges, it was a 54% decline. That's above the 35% cut the federal government implemented earlier this year.
What this does come into a question of is how do Canadians want to fund the high-quality post-secondary system?
Universities and colleges have increasingly turned to international students to help with that funding. At Queen's University in Kingston, a Canadian student would pay just over $7,500 for a year's tuition. An international student pays nearly $57,000. The same situation at Fanshawe College in London, Ontario. International students pay 345% more compared to Canadian students.
It really does pose an almost existential financial risk for Canada's universities.
But post-secondary institutions have often ignored the financial risks for the communities they're in. A report from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation notes that in most major urban centres, the increase in international students has contributed to higher rents and the lowest vacancy rates since 1988, and many post-secondary institutions have not helped with that situation. Like in Vancouver, where the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser University had 23,600 international students enrolled in 2023, but both schools only have 16,500 student beds between them, an additional strain to Canada's most expensive housing market. But despite the housing concerns, the universities still want more international students with fewer rules about what they're allowed to do while here.
No more restrictions on their work permits, no more restrictions on graduate students, and don't make any more changes to the cap.
A more permanent international student cap could be announced as soon as November, Neithu, when the Liberals put forward immigration targets for the coming years, and the Prime Minister has already signaled broad-based immigration cuts are likely to be included.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. And a little later on Global National, we'll look at the prospect of increasing home prices given the expectation of another interest rate cut by the Bank of Canada. In Saskatoon tonight, there is an outpouring of well wishes for the victim of a horrific high school assault that took place on Thursday. Students, parents, and residents laying flowers, teddy bears, and notes outside of Evan Hardy Collegiate. They're wishing a speedy recovery to a 15-year-old girl who was doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire during the lunch hour on Thursday. The alleged perpetrator, a 14-year-old female schoolmate, has been charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, and arson. Despite growing calls for answers, including from opposition Conservatives, there is still no word tonight from either the RCMP or the Canadian government. The question remains how the 20-year-old Pakistani national we told you about last night, an alleged ISIS sympathizer, managed to enter Canada. He's accused of scheming to carry out a mass stabbing at a Jewish center in Brooklyn. The man, Mohammed Shehzab Khan, was arrested last week in the quiet Quebec community of Ormstown, not far from the Canada-U.S. border. The FBI alleges he was trying to enter into Vermont and then travel to New York. U.S. authorities had been monitoring him through undercover agents and tipped off the Mounties who arrested him without incident. New Brunswick's election hasn't been called yet, but it seems the province's Liberal Party has already kicked it into high gear. The party launched its campaign today ahead of the vote in October. As recent opinion polls suggest, they're leading over the governing Progressive Conservatives and controversial Premier Blaine Higgs. Silas Brown reports.
A capacity crowd of over 400 people crowded Fredericton's Boyce Farmers Market Sunday to nominate the New Brunswick Liberals' final candidate for this fall's election, Liberal leader Susan Holt. But as the party officially launched its campaign, their chief opponent, Progressive Conservative Premier Blaine Higgs, was never far from the conversation.
When a system is in crisis, it needs stable leadership, not chaos.
The Liberal campaign slogan is "Focused on You," but Holt did tell reporters that the upcoming vote, scheduled for October 21st, will likely serve as a referendum on Higgs' 6 years as Premier.
I think people will consider the contrast. They'll look at the last 6 years, they'll ask themselves if they're better off.
Higgs has had a difficult 18 months, with cabinet minister resignations and criticisms of his leadership from inside the party, including over controversial changes to school gender identity policy. Political scientist J.P. Lewis says that means many in the province are more politically aware than they might normally be.
The fact that we've had these personal conflicts, we might assume that the electorate has been a bit more engaged in terms of the news stories.
The governing PCs are trying to make the election about another unpopular leader, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and have tried to use their key campaign plank, a 2 percentage point cut to the provincial portion of the HST, to tout their commitment to affordability and fiscal stewardship.
Let's not put New Brunswick back in the red.
On Sunday, the crowd was made up of a mix of longtime party supporters and some who are newer to partisan politics, but many are united in why they're supporting the party.
I I just think we got to get rid of Higgs, so that's why I'm supporting the Liberals.
I see in this group of Liberals the desire to actually effect change and finish the promises they put out.
It's that energy Holt is looking to harness.
We're listening, and you're telling us it's time for a change.
Holt and the New Brunswick Liberals will be hoping that that desire for change is shared by a majority of the province's 49 ridings. Silas Brown, Global News, Fredericton.
Police in Waterloo, Ontario have charged a man after seizing more than 200 firearms. Officers who stopped a vehicle for a traffic violation spotted 17 guns and ammunition inside. A subsequent search of the man's home uncovered more than 200 other firearms, most of them allegedly improperly stored. The 39-year-old suspect is facing multiple charges. In the U.S., a manhunt is ongoing in southeastern Kentucky tonight for a suspect who opened fire on a rural highway last night, shooting multiple people.
Search teams are in the woods up there. We also have assistance from federal, state, and local departments. Be aware of your surroundings. You know, he could pop up anywhere. I hate to say that, but he could.
Police are searching in hilly terrain near an exit on Interstate 75 for 32-year-old Joseph Couch, who's been identified as the person of interest. Police say the suspect is armed and dangerous. 9 vehicles were hit by gunfire around 5:30 p.m. Saturday. 5 people were shot. Police have recovered the suspect's vehicle from a nearby service road and say they found an AR-15 rifle believed to be the gun used in the shooting. New details tonight into last week's deadly high school shooting in Winder, Georgia. The mother of the accused gunman says she called the Appalachia High School on the morning of the attack, warning a counselor about an extreme emergency involving her 14-year-old son. The teen, Colt Gray, has been charged with 4 counts of murder and is accused of killing 2 students and 2 teachers during the shooting on Wednesday morning. The boy's father has also been charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Officials say Colin Gray was charged because he knowingly allowed his son to possess the AR-15 style assault rifle used in the high school shooting. In the Middle East, 3 Israeli border guards were killed in a shooting at a border crossing between the West Bank and Jordan. Israeli authorities say a gunman drove in on a truck from the Jordanian side of the crossing before exiting the vehicle, then opening fire at security. He was then killed after a shootout ensued. The suspect's identity remains unknown, but Jordanian authorities are investigating. Israel has closed all of its land crossings with Jordan. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the attack as terrorism, blaming it on what he calls the murderous ideology led by Iran's axis of evil. Venezuela's opposition presidential candidate has been granted political asylum in Spain as he goes into exile. Edmundo Gonzalez fled Venezuela after a warrant was issued for his arrest. Venezuela's government says it granted Gonzalez safe passage to help restore political stability in the country. Gonzalez had been in hiding for weeks at the Dutch embassy in Caracas. He's widely considered by both the opposition and Western governments to be the legitimate winner of July's presidential race over President Nicolas Maduro. Confidence boost for buyers. Coming up, how the latest economic shifts are setting the stage for a dynamic fall in the housing market. The Bank of Canada's expected decision this fall to slash interest rates for a 3rd time in a row is expected to spur activity in a relatively sleepy housing market. That's according to fall economic forecasts from several experts, though it could still take time for the impact of any rate to be felt. But as Gaviola tells us, there are some exceptions, including the red-hot Toronto real estate market.
Like the leaves changing colors this fall, the housing market is expected to see a shift, spurred by 3 breaks on the interest rate this summer from the Bank of Canada.
There's a renewed sense of confidence amongst consumers. They've been waiting for these cuts. I do think that there's a lot of pent-up demand.
According to RE/MAX's fall outlook, residential sale prices are expected to jump between 1% and 6% this fall in the majority of Canadian regions surveyed. There are some exceptions, though, notably Toronto, Hamilton, Burlington, and Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario, where prices are expected to be flat or decline. A snapshot this week showed a sluggish market in the Greater Toronto area in August, with sales activity down. TD's Rishi Sandhi says condo sales in particular will continue to struggle this fall, but that may be a plus for people waiting to get on the real estate ladder.
And that'll be helpful from an affordability perspective, particularly for first-time home buyers who tend to buy those units as sort of their first home.
But RE/MAX's president continues to call for a pause of the current mortgage stress test, which requires buyers to prove they can afford the higher interest rate of either 5.25% or the rate negotiated with their lender plus 2%.
That policy was put in place as a preventative measure in a rising interest rate environment. And now we're in a declining interest rate environment. I don't think it's fair to that segment of the marketplace that deserves a chance to start building some equity.
Even with that financial guardrail in place, many analysts expect more signs of life across Canada's housing markets this fall and beyond, though unaffordability remains relatively high. Neetu?
Anne Gaviola in Toronto. Thanks, Anne. A new approach to tackle homelessness across Canada. We'll tell you what it is next. New video from Fisheries and Oceans Canada showing the remarkable rescue of a humpback whale in BC. The marine mammal had been struggling to free itself of 20 floats, lines and traps. Those items had become embedded onto the whale's skin and also wrapped around the animal's mouth. Experts say it's possible the whale had been traveling like this for months. It has been roughly 3 years since a clash between housing advocates and police in Halifax over a controversial tent encampment. A review into the incident found many issues with the way police had handled the crisis. Heidi Petracek reports on what Halifax has learned and the lessons experts say should be applied across Canada.
Violence erupted in Halifax when city police officers used force and pepper spray on protesters protecting a makeshift shelter from demolition. 25 people were arrested.
Amongst my clients, there were injuries, including concussions and trauma, just having to go through that.
Most of the charges eventually dropped. Now, almost 3 years after the chaos, an independent review by a Toronto law firm found mistakes and miscalculations made by city staff and police.
Both made a last-minute unplanned decision that didn't take into account all the complexities. There were certainly some, including police officers, who identified that as a problem and recommended not proceeding.
The report's 37 recommendations include a public apology, but neither the mayor nor the city's new chief of police, who wasn't in the job at the time, would commit to that.
I think words are one thing, but our actions have shown how serious we are about dealing with people who are homeless.
I'm not going to speak to all the recommendations in the piecemeal action. We will report back to the board when it's appropriate to do so.
The report has also recommended the city's police department review its use of force policies and its policies around the deployment of pepper spray. The review does acknowledge Halifax's homelessness strategy has improved. A closure of encampment sites in March was without incident, although the city then had to designate 9 new sites this summer out of need.
It's just completely strained and overwhelmed.
The crisis won't be solved, says this social work professor, until government addresses poverty.
We need to move housing outside of that private market. We need supportive community housing. All those things are happening, but it's going to take a lot of time.
Cities such as Halifax forced to face the ongoing question of how best to help people in the meantime. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Next, inspiring Canadian stories as the Paris Paralympics come to a close.
And I'll be performing at Super Bowl 59. Will you be pulling up? I hope so.
American rap superstar Kendrick Lamar is headlining the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show. It's the second time Lamar will grace the stage at the NFL's main event. He also performed at Dr. Dre's star-studded West Coast hip-hop showcase in 2022. Lamar's announcement comes months after he won a highly publicized rap feud with his Canadian counterpart, Drake. The Super Bowl will take place in New Orleans on February 9th. The Paris Paralympics are officially over, and Team Canada has a lot to be proud of. A flurry of medals over the final days of competition helped Canada smash its medal total from Tokyo. Mackenzie Gray tallies up the stories of Paralympic success.
Canada's Paralympic team had great success over the final few days, taking home 6 medals Saturday. Para-swimmer Shelby Newkirk returned to the Paralympics for a second attempt at a medal after setting Canadian records in every event she entered at her first games in Tokyo.
Yesterday I had 2 events. I had my 100 backstroke, which I won the bronze in, and then I also had a relay. And by the time I hit the wall in that relay, I was completely exhausted. I knew that I'd had the season I wanted. I achieved my goals. I hit the wall and my body was just begging for a break.
Canada is leaving with the most gold medals since the 2008 Beijing Games, finishing in 12th with 10 gold, 9 silver, and 10 bronze medals.
Canada has been doing fantastic and getting to be in the village and getting to be in the same apartments and Canada House as everybody, and to see like all the success coming in. And
Newkirk says winning bronze wasn't her only highlight.
Somebody who said their daughter is like me, and she saw somebody on TV and she saw me and she saw that these dreams are possible. And so I think that just makes it so much more meaningful, and it's something that I love about the Paralympics.
Canadian para-canoeist Brianna Hennessy and swimmer Nicholas Bennett representing Canada as flag bearers in the closing ceremony. 20-year-old Bennett, Canada's first gold medalist in Paris, along with another gold and silver medal, became the first Canadian male swimmer to win multiple golds at a Paralympic Games since 2004. And 39-year-old Hennessy returns and wins silver after failing to bring home a medal in the Tokyo Games.
Both amazing athletes that have achieved amazing feats, not just at this Games, but in their career. I think we all have our own story, and we all have our own hurdles that we've come through. We all have our own kind of journey to get here.
Newkirk says she's walking away feeling accomplished and excited for a well-deserved break. Mackenzie Gray, Global News.
Inspiring indeed. That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is the Canmore Engine Bridge in Canmore, Alberta. Thanks so much for watching and have a great night.